What is up, everybody? I know Robert already asked, but how are y'all doing tonight? Yeah. Man, like everybody's sitting over here. I think I'm just going to stand right here for the rest of the night. Is that okay? Can y'all see me over there? I'm just kidding. I can't stand still. I go crazy if I stand still, so I'll walk back and forth. But I'll put my notes over here, and so then I'll just come see y'all more often. Does that sound good? Does that work? Okay, good. Jeff's cool with that. Well, thanks for being here tonight. Thank you, Robert, for that introduction and for those announcements. Like you said, my name is Chris. I'm the college pastor here at Brazos Fellowship. Now, I am excited about tonight because tonight is week 3 of our series, Exposed, and we have been talking for the last few weeks about how we all have different areas in our life that we hide behind, or we hide from the people around us. And week 1, we looked at the story of Rahab. We talked about shame, right? That shame wants to speak for us, that shame wants to define us, but God wants to take the thing that has marked us for so long in shame, and He wants to use it to show His salvation. And then last week, we talked about doubts and questions, that we all have doubts at different times, but it's about how we handle our doubts. Are we honest about the questions that we have? We looked at a story of a dad and a son who come to Jesus, and in this encounter with Jesus, the dad still has some doubts, but I love the way he handled it because he owned his doubts in that moment, and God met him there in the middle of it, and He healed his son. If you missed either one of those weeks, I encourage you to get on our YouTube channel. Just search 242 College Ministry, and you can check out both of those in their entirety. Now, tonight, we're going to talk about something that I feel like is going to hit closer to home for a lot of people, myself included in this room. And my prayer is that you will just hang in there with me, okay? Don't check out when I tell you what we're going to talk about, because we're going to be talking about fear and anxiety. And sometimes we don't want to admit that we struggle with fear and anxiety, and so we're like, nope, I'm good, and we just check out. But I want you to lean in tonight and listen. Okay, does anybody like movies? Okay, yeah, I mean, most people like movies. I see some people with 2 hands up. They're like, I really like movies. I think that we all like movies because it's an opportunity to escape from reality. We get to go maybe live someone else's life for a couple of hours. But would anybody say, okay, Chris, when I'm asked what are my hobbies, I say movies is one of my hobbies. Anybody like that? Any real movie? Okay, yeah, a few hands. That's awesome. I love movies, okay? And one of my favorite things about movies, and I think that y'all will relate, especially the people that are like, that's my hobby, is movie quotes, right? Like the one-liners. They're just awesome because you can just slip them into conversation. You can ease tension. You can make people laugh. Like there's a movie quote for every situation, and it's just awesome. Some of the more famous movie quotes that I think everyone in the room will recognize is Buddy the Elf, what's your favorite color, right? Or one of my favorites, hey, Mary, so what do you say the chances are of a guy like me and a girl like you getting together? And Mary responds, not good. Not good like 1 in 100? More like 1 in a million. So you're telling me there's a chance, right? Or Dory, just keep swimming, right? So, but when you think about it, these movie quotes, these one-liners, so often they stick out to us because of when they happen in the movie, right? It's this climactic moment. There's this pressure. There's this moment where they have to overcome, or maybe they are seeing victory in the story, and it doesn't even really matter what they said. We remember the moment because of what's happening, and then what they said just becomes famous. Like growing up, one of my favorite movies in my house was Rocky. Now, it's about this boxer from Philadelphia, the Italian stallion, and the whole movie, he is training for the fight of his life, right? And he gets in the ring against Apollo Creed, and he whoops him. It's awesome. And so it's towards the end of the movie, he's standing in the ring victorious, and he's sweaty, and he's bloody, and he looks out and he sees his wife in the crowd, and he's like, yo, Adrian! I don't know anybody named Adrian, right? But that movie line just sticks out to me because it defined the moment of what happened. I felt like I was in the ring with Rocky when he says that. I'm like, yeah, Adrian, yeah, that's awesome, right? Or if you've seen Titanic, the 2 main characters in the movie, there's Jack and there's Rose, right? They're from very different socioeconomic classes, but they fall in love. And so they're sneaking around the boat, going places they're not supposed to go. doing things they're not supposed to do, but we won't talk about that part, right? But then they come to this moment in the movie where they go to the very front of the Titanic, and they're standing up on the rail, and Jack stretches out his arms, and he's like, I'm the king of the world. I'm like, I want to be the king of the world. What he didn't know that we knew was like 10 minutes later in the movie, he's not going to feel like the king of the world anymore, is he? Because the Titanic is going to hit an iceberg, and that ship is going down. And most people are going to die, and then Rose is going to be like, come back, Jack, come back, right? But the moment, in the emotion, what he was feeling is what he said, and that's why we tend to identify with people because of these movie quotes and these one-liners. What would it look like if I followed you around with a camera? Now, some of you are already scared. Trust me, I am too. I don't really want to follow some of you around with a camera. But what if I followed you around with a camera? We're going to make a movie of your life, and when you get to those defining moments, like pressure is on, what is going to be your response? That's what we're going to look at for a minute tonight, is when pressure is applied, what comes out of you? Now, I think for some of us, probably for a lot of us, myself included, our default setting tends to be anxiety. Like our default setting tends to be anxiety. When we feel this pressure, when we feel like we don't have control, when we can't see the outcome of our current situation, we tend to get fearful, anxious, nervous, and sometimes that even leads into depression because we feel like we don't have any control, and our default setting is anxiety. And anxiety is so weird, isn't it? Because you can be going through a situation with someone standing right beside you. They're experiencing the exact same thing, and they seem so cool and calm and collected, but you can feel the heat being turned up. Like you're standing in that moment and you feel like it's getting hot in the room and you aren't sure how to respond. And I think that so often we want to suppress those feelings. We want to hide, even though this is our default setting, we want to hide our anxiety, hide our fear from the people around us because we've convinced ourselves it means that we're broken. Or means that we're less than. It means that we're not good enough because if the person standing next to me can go through the same situation as me and not respond in the same way, then there must be something wrong with me. And so we want to suppress it and hide it, but we've been talking for the last few weeks about how we need to let people in, right? That we need to be honest in these situations. We need to expose these areas and let people know what's actually going on. Now, tonight we're going to look at a story from Daniel, and it's a story about these three guys. Maybe you've heard of them: Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Don't ask me to spell it. It'll be on the screen in a minute. I don't know how to spell their names. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are Israelites. Okay, that means they're Hebrews, and they live in Israel. Now, the great empire of Babylon is coming into Israel, and they conquer the nation. And when they conquer the nation, they decide, King Nebuchadnezzar says, hey, I want you to take everyone as slaves and bring them back to Babylon. And so Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, along with millions of other Israelites, get captured by Babylon and taken back to Babylon as slaves. Now, what we don't really know why, but at some point in the story, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego find favor with the king. He likes them. For whatever reason, he just connects with them. And so they start rising up the ranks. And these guys rise, even while they're still slaves in Babylon, they rise all the way up, and they're named as some of the chief advisors to King Nebuchadnezzar. Now, at some point, King Nebuchadnezzar has this great idea. He's like, okay, so I want you to build a statue and put it right in the middle of town where everybody can see it. So he's talking to his advisors, he's talking to his team, and they're like, okay, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. What should the statue be? And King Nebuchadnezzar's like, me? Duh. He was really high on himself, and he wanted everyone else to think that he was really cool, and so that's exactly what they did. They built a 90-foot tall statue made out of gold of the king. They put it right in the middle of the town, and no matter where you were, you could look up and you could see the statue. And so after the statue has been built, King Nebuchadnezzar has another great idea, and he's like, okay, now every day I want you to play some music. And when the music is played, I want it to be able to be heard all over the kingdom. And when the music is played, I want everyone to stop what they're doing, to bow down, face the statue, and worship me. And so they made it a law. They said, okay, every day we're going to play music. And when this happens, it doesn't matter if you're in the field, it doesn't matter if you're in the kitchen, it doesn't matter if you're taking a nap, whatever you're doing, you stop what you're doing, you bow down, and you worship this statue. And it seemed to be working well. Everybody's getting in on it. Everybody's doing it except for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These three guys are like, hey, we can't do this. We can't bow down and worship this idol because we serve God. And God says, hey, you're not supposed to worship any other gods, just me. And as you can imagine, King Nebuchadnezzar was not real excited about the way they handled this situation. In fact, he gets really mad at them. And he tells them, hey, if you don't bow down and worship this idol, I'm going to throw you into the fiery furnace. Basically, he's saying, if you don't do what I'm telling you to do, I'm going to have you executed. And if there was ever a moment in their story, the movie is being played, if there's this defining moment where they have a choice to make, should we give in and save our life, or should we stand up? This is that moment. And if anyone was ever going to feel fear or anxiety, it would be Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, because they just got a death sentence. They just got told exactly what was going to happen if they don't obey. But check out their response in Daniel chapter 3, starting in verse 16. It said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you. If we were thrown into the blazing furnace, the God whom we serve is able to save us. He will rescue us from your power, your majesty. But even if he doesn't, we want to make it clear to you, your majesty, that we will never serve your gods or worship the gold statue that you have set up." Man, I love this because they are faced with impending doom. They are told that their lives are on the line. And in that moment, they're like, hey, we know what's about to happen. Like, if this was me, if this was you, this would be the moment where anxiety, nervousness, fear would rise up. Because when we face these pressure situations, when we get caught in the middle of something and we're not sure what's going to happen, we're not sure what the outcome is, and we start playing the game of what if. Has anybody ever played the what if game before? It's like, well, what if this happens? Or what if that happens? Or what if I say this? Or what if this doesn't work out? Or what if everything goes wrong? Or what if I lose? Or what if? And we create all of these scenarios in our mind. And the crazy thing is, most of the time, none of them are true. They don't even come to pass, right? But we get so worked up and anxious and fearful and nervous because we've created these scenarios. And for these guys, it's even worse because they know exactly what's going to happen. They know if they don't get in line, it's going to cost them their life. But it's in this moment that we begin to see what their response is. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stand up and they say, King, we hear what you're saying, but we serve a God that can save us. Our God can save us. Man, it's so powerful. And maybe you walked in here tonight and you need to be reminded, or maybe you need to hear for the first time, that there is a God that loves you, that wants to be in a relationship with you, and He is a God that can save you. It doesn't matter what your situation is. Our God makes the impossible possible. Whatever is causing your fear or anxiety, God says, hey, give it to me, because we serve a God that can. We serve a really big God. In Psalm chapter 33, verse 6, it says that God breathed the stars into existence. Like, how does that even happen? Have you ever done that before? Right? Okay, so I am a Southern guy. I was born and raised in Texas. And in Texas, maybe you can relate, we get excited when it gets cold enough for us to be able to breathe and see our breath, right? It's like, yes, winter has arrived because it's cold enough for me to see my breath. And that's pretty cool, right? We breathe and then it disappears, and so we breathe again and then it disappears. God's like, hey, I can do one better than that. My breath is going to light up the night sky. Milky Way, right? Like, we serve a big God. In Luke chapter 12, It talks about how God knows the number of hairs on your head. This isn't talking about he knows the average number of hairs on a human head. No, it is a very specific language that says he knows the number of hairs on your head, and your head, and your head, and your head. We serve a really big God who can save us. And so they're standing in this moment, and they're saying, hey, King, we hear what you're saying, but we serve a God that can save us. But they don't stop there, do they? They say, we serve a God who can save us, and we also serve a God who will rescue us. Our God can save us. Our God will rescue us. King, we believe not only is our God capable, we believe that he wants to do it, and he's going to deliver us. Now, if their speech, if their movie quote ended right there, it would have been an epic speech. Like they would have been writing about it for years to come. Did you hear about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Do you know what they said to King Nebuchadnezzar? He's like, I'm going to have you killed. And they're like, hey, we serve a God who can save us. We serve a God who will save us. Drop the mic, walk away. But the story doesn't end there, does it? Because they said, hey, we believe our God's capable. He can save us. We believe our God will save us. But here is the most epic one-liner, I believe, maybe in the entire Bible. Because their next statement is, even if he doesn't. We believe that he can. We believe that he will. But even if he doesn't. Even if God doesn't move the way that we want him to move. Even if God doesn't come through, even if he doesn't save us, even if he doesn't rescue us, we still believe. This is crazy. We still believe that God is good. They ended those verses by saying, even if God doesn't rescue us, we will never worship your gods. We will never give in. If it costs me my life, I will stand up here and say, even if. That's powerful. I remember one of the biggest even if moments in my life. I was 20 years old. I was living in Dallas. The rest of my family lived in Tyler. And we moved around a lot when I was a little kid, different town every couple of years. There wasn't a lot of stability. My parents didn't really get along. There was a lot of fighting in the home. It wasn't fun growing up in my home. But then there was my grandmother. We called her Gran, and she was amazing. I remember growing up for holidays, we would go over to Gran's house for all major holidays, and all of the family would come together, and no one really got along, right? Like they didn't talk to each other when it wasn't a holiday, but when we came to Gran's house, man, there was just peace. It was just calm. There's laughter. Everyone is having a great time. She was the glue that held the family together. I remember growing up all through middle school and high school, I would go to my grandmother's house, to Grant's house, over the summer. And I'd spend a couple of weeks. It would just be me. My sisters wouldn't be there. Like none of my cousins would be there. It would just be me hanging out at my grandparents' house. And Gran was one of my best friends growing up, which is why when I got a phone call at 20 years old telling me that she may not make it through the night, I took it pretty hard. See, 6 months before that, Gran had gone in for her annual checkup. And she had always had pretty good health. And, she had struggled with high blood pressure and stuff, but nothing major. She'd always had pretty good health, and it was time for her annual checkup. So she goes in, but she tells the doctor, hey, something's off. I'm just not feeling that great. And so he's like, okay, let's run a few tests. So they ran a few tests. A couple weeks go by, and they get the results back, and so they let her know the results of the test, and they tell her that she has stage 4 lymphoma, cancer. And it's not a good prognosis. Basically, they told her that she was terminal. There wasn't a lot of hope. There was no getting out of this. And so she fought, and she went through chemo, she went through radiation, but the doctors were like, at best, this might add a little time, but it's not going to change the prognosis. You see, this was a problem for me when I heard this, because I grew up in church. I grew up hearing story after story after story about a God that could and did heal people. There are some crazy stories. I don't know if you've read the New Testament when Jesus was walking around, but there are some insane stories about Jesus healing people and the followers of Jesus. Because it wasn't just, Jesus did that, but Jesus isn't around anymore. No, Paul laid hands on a handkerchief, And then they took that handkerchief and they laid it on a sick person, and that sick person was healed. In Acts chapter 5, Peter is walking down the street. He's just walking with his buddy, and his shadow falls on a sick person, and they're healed. Like, he didn't even stop and pray for him. He's just walking, and his shadow is just like, oh, cool, I'm healed, right? Like, that's crazy. We serve a God that can heal people, and I believe that. And so for 6 months, I prayed, believing that God could and would heal Grant, which is why it was so hard when I got that phone call telling me that she may not make it through the night. Because now I'm sitting in this place, and I'm like, why didn't God do what I expected him to do? Why didn't God heal my grandmother? I got to Tyler, and the next morning she passed away. Y'all, it wrecked me. Like, it tore me up on the inside because I didn't understand. I couldn't make sense of it. I didn't understand how I knew that God could, and I believed that God would, but he didn't. And maybe that's you, and you're like, Chris, I've been through it. I don't know which way is up. I've been through the ringer. It doesn't make any sense. Life is not fair. Why is this happening? You see, it is easy for us to believe that God can move. I mean, we can look at stories. I just told you some of them. We can look at other people's lives, maybe even in our own life, and we can say, yeah, of course God is capable. Like, if I love Jesus, if I believe the Bible, then I believe that God is capable. And when things are going well, man, we can stand up confidently and say, yeah, I believe that God will. Because I have seen him move before. I have heard stories of how he's moved before. So, of course, I believe that he will. But what is much more difficult is when things don't go how we think they should go, for us to stand up and say, even if he doesn't, I still think that he's good. I still trust him. I still love him. And this is where it gets personal, because fear and anxiety are very real. They're not made up, right? It's not like the boogeyman. Like, they're real. They're not hiding under your bed. They're in your heart and in your mind. There are people in this room, absolutely, that have to deal with it every single day. So it's real. But this is where it gets personal, because I believe so strongly that it is when we can stand up and say, even if I can't see the outcome, even if I don't know how this is going to work out, even if it's the worst case scenario, I will still trust that God is good, that he loves me, that he wants what is best, even if it's not what I want. And it's hard, right? And so, what does that look like? What does it look like for us to begin to have even if faith? I want to look at a verse in Philippians chapter 4. It says, don't be anxious about anything. Yeah, that's cool. That's easy. Like, that sounds like, oh yeah, it's like this flippant statement just thrown out there. Hey, don't be anxious about anything. But check out how it continues. But in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. It says, don't be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, present your requests to God. Where does your peace come from? What's the foundation of your faith? Because when you walk into these even if moments, you have a choice to make. You can say, what if? Or you can say, even if. Anxiety says, what if? Faith says, even if. Fear says, what if? Peace says, even if. I'm not standing up here trying to downplay anxiety. I'm not standing up here saying it's not real, that you're not walking through it, that you don't have to deal with it, that you need to get over it. I'm not in any way trying to belittle that. What I am standing up here and telling you is that we have a choice. Because in these verses, the most important word is not peace. That's an important word. We need to know peace, right? We need to experience peace. That's how we get through anxiety and fear, but it is where your peace comes from. What is the foundation of your faith? The most important word up here is of. The peace that gets you through your anxiety only comes from one place. It comes from God. It's the peace of God that transcends all understanding. We can't define it, we can't describe it, we can't understand it, we can't explain it, but it doesn't change that it exists. It doesn't change that it's offered. It doesn't change that it will change our life. But here's the best part about it. The peace of God comes simply from asking. It says, present your requests to God. It says, hey, enter into that situation with prayer. The peace of God is not predicated on your behavior or your obedience or your sacrifice. I'm going to say that again. The peace of God is not predicated on your behavior, your obedience, or your sacrifice. It's not determined by your situation. Psalm 112 says this, surely the righteous will never be shaken. They will be remembered forever. They will have no fear of bad news. Their hearts are steadfast, trusting in the Lord. Their hearts are secure. They will have no fear in the end. They will look in triumph on their foes. You know what these verses don't say? It doesn't say that the righteous won't face struggles. It doesn't say that the righteous are going to avoid pressure. It doesn't say that the righteous won't even have an opportunity for anxiety and fear to well up inside of them. But what it does say, and this is a promise, not a command, it's a promise that says that the righteous will never be shaken. We need to have a base. We need to have a firm foundation that allows us to stand up and say, even if. And here's the deal. It has to be a base that is anchored deeper than our emotions. And when faced with that situation, when we walk into one of those even if moments, we can stand up and say, what if? Play that game, go down that road, let anxiety win. Or we can say, even if I don't understand, even if I don't see the outcome, even if I don't like what happens, even if I don't agree with the decision, even if everything goes worst case scenario, I still will trust in God because He is a good God. Maybe God didn't move like you wanted Him to. Maybe the timing was different. Maybe the outcome isn't what you expected. But this is your defining moment. When the pressure is applied, when you don't know which way is up, when you are riddled and crippled with fear and anxiety, this is your defining moment. How will you respond? Will you have even if faith? Because I believe, and again, I'm not questioning your faith, okay? But I believe that when we can find the strength and we can build that base that goes deeper than our emotions, and we can stand up and put out our arms and not scream, I'm the king of the world, but scream, even if. That's when we begin to find freedom and healing and victory over our anxiety and our fear. It's in that space. And my hope over the last few weeks is that you have begun to process and identify some different areas in your life where you have been hiding some things, or you've been hiding behind things. You have let areas of your life maybe define you, to speak for you. Maybe that's shame, maybe it's doubt, maybe it's anxiety. It may be something else altogether. But my hope is that as we begin to recognize that those areas exist, and then we begin to be honest about those, that we begin to find freedom. Because it is when we let people in. It's when we expose those areas to the people around us. When we're honest with ourselves, that's when we begin to experience true community. Not just an opportunity to grow in relationship with each other, but an opportunity to grow in our faith and our relationship with God. Let's pray.